There's something in our path.
I can't see anything.
This is the Atlantis. We're in urgent need of assistance. Over. I repeat, this is the Atlantis. We're in urgent need of assistance. Do you read?
This is Captain Leonore Grayson. We have a time-sensitive cargo on board our vessel, and we're running blind. Please respond.
So, hello, it is a real pleasure to be here and to share with you our thoughts on the impact of IVDR for laboratories performing like ours, academic diagnostic activities. So, my laboratory works in the context and sorry, these are my financial disclosures in the field of hematopoietic cell and gene therapy. I'm scientific advisor and founders of a few entities that are working in this area. So our diagnostic laboratory operates in the context of the Division of Pediatric Hematology, Oncology, and Stem Cell Transplant at Padua University and Hospital. This division hosts a clinical unit that take care of pediatric patients affected by hematologic and oncologic diseases for their primary diagnostic care and for their treatment, including by hematopoietic cell transplantation. This unit operates in good clinical practices. It hosts multiple clinical trials, and it is JC certified. We have within the division the Diagnostic Laboratory of Pediatric Hematopoietic and Oncologic Disorders that we will discuss in a moment, and that operates under GCLPs. We have a biological sample bank that contains over 20,000 samples since the 80s, and that operates according to Biobank European and Italian regulations. We have a stem cell transplant laboratory working in good manufacturing practices and research laboratories within which some studies are conducted in the spirit of GLP. All this is to tell you that we are dealing with good practices a lot. And so we are very interested in implementing these practices and keeping up to date as far as quality is concerned. What about our diagnostic laboratory? Actually, it is an advanced diagnostic lab that operates as National Referral Center for the morphologic and cytofluorimetric diagnosis of acute leukemias, lymphoblastic leukemias at the Italian level within the IEOP circuit, so the Italian Association for Pediatric Oncohematology Disorders. We are National Referral Center for molecular diagnosis of acute myeloid leukemias, lymphomas, and solid tumors in children. We are regional referral centers for molecular ALL diagnosis and for monitoring of minimal residual disease in ALL. And again, we are regional referral centers for the diagnosis of several red blood cell disorders, several hemoglobinopathies, and we coordinate and operate in the setting of sickle cell newborn disease, newborn screening. And all this activity accounts for approximately 6,000 samples that are received by our laboratory every year from all over Italy. In this setting, we work with more than 50 locally established protocols for diagnostic and monitoring tests. These protocols apply to cytofluorimetry, cytogenetics, morphology, mutation screenings, including TCR rearrangements, and we are now implementing several protocols that operate with next generation sequencing. And we have people in the laboratory who are responsible for each of these techniques and activities. These protocols are operated in the context of 2 physically separated labs with approximately 40 different operators involved in running the test and generating the test results. The diagnostic lab operates under ISO 9001 certification, and we are working, as we will discuss in a moment, for obtaining ISO 15189 certification, and obviously we are preparing for managing the new regulation on in vitro diagnostic devices. That is obviously the topic of today's discussion. So what's IVDR? I think most of the audience listening to my talk would know about it, but just to give you some background introduction, the European Union In Vitro Diagnostic Medical Device Regulation 2017-746 took effect on 26th of May of 2017, and it has a transition period of 5 years. So it will be enforced, that will be enforced till the 26th of May of 2022. This regulation replaces the existing Directive 98/79/EC on the in vitro diagnostic medical devices that was issued in October 1999, which is so now over 2 decades old. And this new regulation that is in place for the in vitro diagnostic devices, it's important because it's intended to ensure the higher level of safety and of health for making available and putting on the market, on the European market, new devices. And this regulation is also important because it set new rules for applying a CE mark to IVDs. Being a regulation, it does not need to be transposed into the national law, and this means that it ensures uniform interpretation throughout the Union, and it would have a broad application in its entire form. Importantly, under the IVDR, the intended purpose determines the classification of a device, and the classification determines the applicable conformity assessment procedure. So the intended purpose of each product is one of the key elements that manufacturers need to define when planning for the IVDR. And it also must be included in the labeling as described in the regulation's general safety and performance requirement. So it would provide a clear statement of what is detected and what is measured by the device, its function, whether it's for screening, for monitoring, for diagnosis, or to aid for diagnosis. It's intended for prognosis, prediction, or companion diagnostic. It would also provide the specific information that is intended to be provided, whether it is automated or not, whether it is qualitative, semi-quantitative, or quantitative, the type of specimen required to run the diagnostic, and where applicable, the testing population. Based on these characteristics, so in vitro diagnostics are classified in a new way, in a rule-based way, and according to this new classification, the vast majority of the devices, except the class A non-sterile, will require the involvement to varying extents of a national body as part of their conformity assessment procedure. An important component is that the IVDR prohibits the grandfathering of devices already CE marked under the previous IVDD, and so all products will need to be freshly CE marked. And the consequence of this is that we would have a huge amount of new IVDs that will undergo conformity assessment with notified bodies before May 26 of 2022. And this would be a huge effort for manufacturers, obviously. But this would have a real substantial impact also for the laboratories dealing with these devices. To date, for ISO 15189, in case of using tests that are already validated by the manufacturer, the laboratory must carry out an independent verification to check to be able to reproduce the performances of the producer. Otherwise, the verification serves to establish their own performance characteristics that the laboratory must take into account control. This means that at the moment, what the norm says is confirm what the manufacturer says and check the situation. If it does not comply with what has been declared, you keep for good your data. Well, this would not continue. In particular, with the next revision of the standard, it is likely that it will be mandatory for the laboratory employing a test developed and validated by the manufacturer to have conformed its performance to that of the manufacturer in order to apply for accreditation. So with the IVD regulation in place, manufacturers will have to be assessed by the notified body for all tests that will want the CE EVD mark, but laboratories will have to deal with stringent requests of conformity of the application of the method. So we won't be able to take for granted our data. We will need to have data conform to the ones of the manufacturer. Obviously, all this applies to tests that are developed by manufacturers, but many laboratories like ours, where advanced diagnostics are performed, employ tests which are developed and built in-house, and that require in-house continuous optimization for providing state-of-the-art information that guide the management of patients that are usually affected by very rare and complex diseases. So labs like ours employ a large and progressively growing set of lab-developed tests that generate the greater proportion of our diagnostic activity and are validated internally. The role of these tests is crucial because our area of expertise is rapidly evolving, and new technology and new discoveries really greatly contribute to improving patients' care, and we cannot take this into account when running our advanced diagnostics. So we need to look at IVDR and how it regulates the use of lab-developed tests. Well, now lab-developed tests are governed by IVDR as well. And in particular, rules for the use and manufacturing of LDTs have been established under the IVDR to ensure the highest level of protection, which is one, obviously, of the main objective of the regulations. And this is a change because in the current directive, the directive of October 98, no requirements were described for LTDs. So it's a real big change for laboratories using LDTs. In particular, what we have understood is that the development and use of LDTs is possible only in the absence of a CE marked alternative, or if the performance of the equivalent CE marked device is not sufficient for the target patient group. So the laboratories that perform tests that are developed in-house must adhere to Article 5 of the IVDR, and the LDT must meet the general safety and performance requirements that are described in Annex 1 of the IVDR. So the EU member states will need to oversee LTD devices manufactured and used within the healthcare institutions in their territory through the notifying bodies. So how do we deal with all this complexity and all these changes? Well, the way we are personally approaching this complexity is to work along with the IVDR preparation also for ISO 15189. Indeed, the IVDR, so the regulation now says that LDT shall be developed and used within the framework of a quality management system, and the laboratory, the hosting institution, and the lab shall be accredited according to ISO 15189. The LDT must comply with the general safety and performance requirements, as we mentioned before, according to Annex 1, and the hosting institution will review experience gained from clinical use and take the corrective actions when necessary, and will compile documentation on device manufacturing, design, and performance, and make a declaration of conformity publicly available. Well, so in our experience and in our plan, the first way to approach IVDR and the changing regulation for our LDTs has thus been to establish a clear path to ISO 15189. And how we did it? First of all, we looked internally and we decided that we needed help. And for this reason, we established a consultancy contract with an expert on ISO 15189. In particular, we activated a plan to certification that is expected to last 18 months. That includes, first of all, review of our lab structure and organization with identification and training and build of a training plan for the person that would be responsible internally for the application of the regulations. We have also a plan for requalification and training of all lab personnel, all of whom is already actively involved in the accreditation plan. And obviously, we have a plan to review the laboratory diagnostic tests and the LDTs. In particular, the first question that came to our mind is whether there's any redundancy or excess of LDTs in our practice today, and whether there would be any need or opportunity to streamline the choice and the number of these tests that are currently in use in the laboratory. And so we are dealing at the moment with a revision of the protocols that is based on this reassessment of what is needed and what has to remain in place in terms of LDTs within our laboratory. And only for these tests, we establish a process of revision of the protocols, of upgrade of the protocols as per norm, of rebuild of the standard operating procedure, and most importantly, definition of a process of a validation plan for these tests that remain important for our current practice. Besides this plan that is robust and I assure you takes a lot of our resources and efforts, we are also working in order to identify the classification of lab devices and the certification procedure envisaged according to the new IVDR rules. We are trying to identify the notifying body who will be able to certify lab devices. We are trying to promote training of personnel on the technical, regulatory, and scientific aspects in relation to their role. We are working to identify and qualify suitable personnel to fill the function of the person responsible for compliance with the regulations. We are performing and planning a gap analysis of our documentation for the identification of any missing data as per technical documentation of Annexes 2 and 3 of the IVDR. And we are trying to start verifying that partners, so distributors, importers, and agents are ready for the application of the IVDR as far as it concerns our diagnostic practices. So the overall impact of the new regulations and the certification plan in our lab has been, first of all, prioritization of QA-related activities, identification and activation of a dedicated consultancy service, as I anticipated you, but also identification and training of dedicated personnel internally. Revision of the list of our tests, as I mentioned, to streamline the protocol revision and validation of the test, and also prospective design of the tests that are currently in development in order to have them already conform to the new requirements that are coming in place. I would imagine that the challenges we are facing are being faced also by other laboratories in our landscape, in Italy in particular, and probably also elsewhere in Europe. By just running a little bit of surveillance locally, we have clearly understood that many laboratories that perform diagnostic and advanced diagnostics like ours are at the moment focused, as we are, on the certification for ISO 15189, and that few laboratories has thus far focused on IVDR. The general perception is that IVDR is a requirement for the manufacturers who need to demonstrate the conformity of their devices. And most diagnostic laboratories expect that the major kit manufacturers would be already adjusting in order to meet their IVDR requirements without necessarily a lot of impact for them, for the laboratories themselves. I can also say that very few information are available on IVDR locally, and in particular, few information are available on its impact on diagnostic laboratories. So I think it is foreseeable and desirable and probably necessary that in view of the application of the new regulation, the demand and supply of specific training on IVDs will increase at the same time.
Atlantis, come in. I'm getting high wind readings from your location, which means you're going to need to make some adjustments to your trajectory.
I'm seeing the same on my screens, Captain.
Take her 6 degrees to starboard. Okay, great. You're back on course.
Captain,
I see it.
we're out of the fog.
Congratulations, Atlantis. We're looking forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks to you, our 3-month mission will still be a success. We couldn't have done it without your guidance. Take us in, May.
I hope this general sense and introduction to this matter from the diagnostic lab perception and from the academic setting could be of interest for you, just to be aware of the fact that we need to be prepared for this upcoming regulation. And I thank you for your attention, and I would be happy to take any question from the audience.